This was the one I identified as the one that I felt I could really do something special with, because I understood how important that inherited relationship with the material and the characters was, and with the music. And it was such it has such powerful themes and such timeless themes. Not musical themes, that as well, but I mean themes, emotional themes, and themes that predate the film. You're dealing with archetypes and struggles that, you know, going back to Hamlet and before, when you're dealing with all of the betrayal and the coming of age and death and rebirth and all of the cycles of life that are what the foundation of all the myths around the world. We were talking a lot about whether we wanted new music or we wanted new characters or we wanted to replace something with something else. And what we found as we explored it, because we always keep the old film loaded up. So as we're looking at with our story department, looking at animatics, looking at sequences, looking at cuts, we'll always go to the old one and just check it one last time. And I have to say, quite often, the way the old movie did it was the right way to do it, and we end up emulating that. The idea behind Black Box was I don't need to have the actors motion captured. We did that. We used those techniques with Jungle Book. It was helpful to a point. By talking to the people on the technical side, more often than not, the data is used as reference, but they'll be building their own performances through animation on top of what the actor's doing. However, what's incredibly valuable is the performance of the actor. And so using the actor's performance as a jumping off point for an animator creates consistency. You inherit the actor's sophistication in the choices that they make. Having Donald Glover, who's an amazing singer, also amazing improviser, which is one of the things that really drew me to him, because he comes from a very common comedic background that I do, and he came up, you know, with a lot of the people that I came up with. You know, I was in the Chicago improv scene and overlaps with UCB and the Tina Fey's world and all that. So I knew that we were going to have a common take on how to do comedy and how to do that type of performance. For the older version of Nala, you have Beyonce, who is, when you think of somebody who you'd be excited to hear reinterpret this role, especially the musical performances, she's sort of in a class all by herself. I knew the audience was going to be hyper-focused on what we're doing. And I felt that I have come to a point in my career that I understand that relationship. And they're excited by the prospect of seeing the story told again, but they're also nervous that you're going to do it in a way that they don't like. And anything, you know, on the one hand, they don't want you to change anything, but on the other hand, they don't want to just see the same thing all over again. And so it becomes this enigmatic puzzle of how do you deliver on everybody's expectations and surprise them. And so I felt that I would use the approach that Walt Disney always used, which is engage on an emotional level, because that cuts through so much of the, you know, the scrutiny. If you could connect, if you could make people feel something, it turns the judgmental part off, and it engages the immersive, empathetic, emotional part that I contend is the key aspect of the film viewing experience. Well, people often ask me if it's live action or if it's animation, and I guess the best answer is it's both, because we make a fully animated film, but then we go into that animated film and we make a live action film around the animation. And but I guess it's a tough one to answer, I like that people are asking the question, because it means that they're going to look at it and they're going to scratch their heads and they're going to deliberate over what it feels like to them. Because technically it's animated, but when you look at it, it's going to look live action. So it should fit in within the gallery of live action animated adaptations. But yet, if you look at the skill and what went into it, it completely lives within the tradition of Disney animation. And so I think it's both. And I don't think you could really understand it until you see it and then you see how he did it. But what's good is it doesn't matter. What's good is if you go to the movie, you're going to be drawn in and you're going to see something that you've never seen before. I think if you have very clear and clean mythology associated with a story, it makes my job as a filmmaker much easier, because throughout the process of writing and developing and shooting and editing, you're trying to refine the story to something that's satisfying. And ultimately it is, the hero's journey, the monomyth, that all of these types of stories always tend to fall into the pattern of. There's different versions of it, but it's always the rise of the hero. There's always a predictable path of the plot as films or stories unfold. And The Lion King adheres very closely to that. And so it has a timeless quality, and it tends to play for different generations and around the world because it has such a relatable story. To me, casting is probably the most important part of making a film, because those partnerships are what get you through, and ultimately it's whose face is going to be on the screen. And in the case of The Lion King, although their faces are on the screen, their voices are so prominent and their personalities are defining the film. And long before anybody knows what you're doing or sees any footage, they're going to hear about who's in it. And so it sends a message to the audience as to what this film is going to be like. Now, as you get closer to films like Jungle Book and then Lion King, and I'm working on Star Wars now with The Mandalorian, you are dealing with a very engaged audience that oftentimes with these properties have grown up with them and they have an emotional connection to them. In certain cases, spanning several generations within their family. So you're not just remembering Lion King, you're remembering Lion King when you saw it when you were 7, or you're remembering Lion King when you brought your kid to it, or you're remembering Lion King when you saw it and then you introduced your kid to it, and then you went to the musical. And so you have this whole basket of memories and emotions that are related to this thing. And so there's a certain protectiveness that people feel because those memories belong to them. And although the IP came from the team that made the original productions, the memory and the sense of connection and even ownership is very much part of very much in the audience's mind. And I think that to not acknowledge that or understand that is to not be serving the property.
Hey guys, it's Lisa with more on The Lion King. Now, the name of the movie seems pretty straightforward, right? But did you know that its original title was actually King of the Jungle? Marketing materials and merchandise had even been made before the studio realised, lions don't live in the jungle. Click here below to subscribe, and remember to also tap the bell to always receive our videos in your feed.